First, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler. As you can see, we've got some breaking news happening right here. So there is a press conference that's going to be taking place with Multnomah County D.A. Mike Schmidt talking about the task forces that were announced back on May 1st. They're sitting down at the table right now. We wanted to bring you this as it happens. It looks like they're about ready to begin. We'll go ahead and switch this over to the D.A. and follow along with what they're saying. Again, this is a live press conference to fill you in on a little bit of the detail before they get going. So these are two new task force teams that have been at work so far, focusing on organized retail theft and for auto theft, two big concerns that a lot of people have had. These task forces have been focusing on it. This is the first time we're getting a full update of what they have accomplished so far, have or have not. This is what we're going to be talking about, what we're going to be hearing about here. Again, as they're setting up, we'll switch over to their audio explicitly as soon as they get going. But it does look like they're about ready to start here. So, all right, yeah, still getting set up a little bit. This is for the media, so media will be asking questions during this, as from what we understand.
All right.
And we'll go ahead and pass it over right now.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming here to East Precinct to really today have a conversation about the kickoff of our task forces, our retail theft task force and our auto theft task force. With me here today, I have Teresa Turner, and you'll get to hear from Teresa and what she brings to leading the retail theft task force, and Cody Linderholm. And Cody here is going to talk to you about the auto theft task force. In fact, Cody was out on a mission last night till 4:30 in the morning, so if he appears a little sleepy, you know why. So I'll just kick us off with a little bit of information and some data that we have, and I think all of you have some slides about the work that we are doing and is reflected in our data. But a little bit of good news. Motor vehicle theft is, according to what we have from January to May, down 5%. Now, it should be noted in the context that we had a really massive increase in automobile theft the last couple years. So down 5% is not good enough, but we anticipate with this founding of this task force that we're going to have more impact, but at least we're starting to go in the right direction. 82% of stolen vehicles are recovered within 30 days. We also see car prowls down, and catalytic converter thefts are down. And I want to call out some of the work of our office and some of our attorneys. Senior Deputy District Attorney Kevin Deemer helped write legislation, Senate Bill 803, that passed a couple years ago and has gone into effect, and we think that that has a lot to do with some of the reasons why we're seeing the decrease in catalytic converter thefts. It's never one thing. There's never one silver bullet. I think there's other reasons too. Some of the thefts, the price of some of the metals is lower than it was. That, of course, helps. There's also been some good law enforcement actions around catalytic converters. But certainly Senate Bill 803 and the work of Kevin Deemer to get that done, I think, really helped. And I should call out Senator Chris Gorsuch was instrumental in carrying that legislation forward. So we're excited about seeing that down. When I first got started, catalytic converters theft was like what I heard about every single day was somebody having their catalytic converter stolen. Retail theft, so that's on the auto theft side. Retail theft, what we know is over 26,000 thefts reported in 2022. That's an increase from where we were in 2020. And theft is one of those things that we know goes underreported in our community as well. So even though we know that there were 26,000 thefts reported, you can count on the fact that there are more thefts that have actually happened in our community that we don't know about because they don't go reported. But the good news for us is that misdemeanor theft referrals have continued their upward trend, and we're starting to see them coming back to our agency like we weren't seeing before. And that's, again, I think speaks to proactive relationships. I've been personally meeting with retailers for the last year, having conversations about how we can work together to better, work on retail theft issues. I saw that the city and Fred Meyer partnered up on some of their strategies, and in fact, from going to Fred Meyer, I know that they check your receipts at the door now. So I think, we're working together, both public and private to see how can we stem the tide on this. And I think the work that Teresa is going to be heading up on the Retail Theft Task Force is just going to add to that nicely. So hopefully we can continue to see a downward trajectory on thefts. Prosecution rates, you have those rates in front of you and some of our data. We've seen year over year that our stolen car prosecution rates are as high as they've ever been. This is despite the fact that we've had some challenges in terms of decisions in the Court of Appeals that have made it a little bit more difficult for us to prove those cases in the courtroom, but we're overcoming that with training and working with police officers to make sure that they know what questions they should be asking. Our deputy DAs actually provide officers in the field with forms that they can use to establish knowledge. So even if in this situation you're not arrested for the stolen car, that they know that the next time that they have you, you know what a stolen car looks like, and we can establish the knowledge element of the crime that we need to establish for a successful prosecution. So I think that collaboration of training with our deputy DAs and using those forms to help them make the cases that are going to make us successful. I also know that we've done a lot of work and are continuing to do a lot of work to make sure that we're sharing information. One of the things that when we really dug into our stolen car declines, or in other words, the cases that came to us but we didn't issue charges, we saw that we were missing the original stolen report and that those weren't coming into our agency. And so all we needed to do to make those cases issuable was to actually connect to that original stolen report, but it just wasn't coming to us. So now we're being more proactive. We identified that as an issue with law enforcement, and we're trying to close those loopholes. So those are some of the reasons why you're seeing the rates of automobile theft, our prosecution rates increase. But Cody will talk to you about some of the things that he sees, what he's doing, and how we expect that those rates will even continue to go up higher. Retail theft continues to be a big issue for us, and the thing that we're doing more proactively on retail thefts is previously, it's been the practice of our agency for a long time that when a theft report comes in, our attorneys look at the reports and they decide whether or not they have enough evidence to issue the case. If we're missing things like video from the store or a report from the loss prevention officer, we would typically send that case back. We would decline it temporarily and ask for follow-up, ask for that information to be forwarded on to us so that we could re-review it and then issue those cases. We have taken the step of, instead of kicking it back to the police officer to gather that information, because we saw that a lot of that was not happening, that follow-up was not being completed, that we're reaching out directly to retailers ourselves and asking for that information. And so we're seeing in 2023, the year-to-date data that I recall off the top of my head was we're around an 81% issuance rate in theft cases. So that is due because of the proactive work of our intake unit to make sure that we're getting those reports. But again, I think Teresa is going to talk to you a little bit about how she's meeting with retailers already, setting tables, talking about how we're going to share information. And that's only going to make us even better at being able to make sure that the cases that we can prove, once we have all the data, that we're actually, or all the evidence rather, that we're getting that all and we're not rejecting cases for lack of the evidence that does exist. So that's another proactive thing that I think is good news and one of the reasons why we're seeing those rates continue to increase. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Cody and Teresa to tell you a little bit. So you'll recall our county commission and our city, Portland, pitched in dollars so that we could fund 2 deputy DA positions and 2 investigator positions as well as some support staff. And so those are now, with Cody and Teresa, we have our deputy DA positions filled. They're in place. They're already hitting the ground running. I was just back in their office space, and thanks to Portland Police for making this space available for our deputies to sit here in the building so that they can have that collaborative relationship with law enforcement to make these cases. So with the support of our county commission and support of the city giving my agency the funding we need, we've now filled the deputy positions. We're still working on filling the investigator positions, but we think we're getting close to that. But they're already doing the work. They're already getting out into the field and doing the things that we knew that they would do. So I'm going to start off with Cody. Why don't you kick us off talking about some of the things that you've seen so far for Auto Theft Task Force?
Sure. It's nice to meet everybody. My name is D.A. Cody Linderholm. I've been with the office for just over 3 years. I started in misdemeanors. I've been at the intake position.
Should we reorient the microphones? Yeah.
Can you spell your name?
Sure. Yeah. Just want me to start over? Okay. Let me know when we're good. Okay, nice meeting everybody. My name is D.A. Cody Linderholm. I've been with the office for just over 3 years. I started in misdemeanors. I've had an intake rotation, briefly did body-worn camera, and for a little over 1.5 years, I've been in Unit AB, which is our felony property and drug crimes. I've been on 5 of the stolen vehicle operations so far, and really excited to take over the task force. I think working with East Precinct and kind of having our home base here is critical to all of the work that we're going to be doing in the coming months. As D.A. Schmidt already said, we've done a lot of work. So we officially started the first, but we have been looking at a lot of different angles and how do we kind of curb the stolen vehicle problem. Some of the work we're going to be doing, just to kind of give a brief overview, persons of interest, places of interest. As you heard, we'll have an investigator. We'll have a lot of officers here at East Precinct that can detach and do follow-up work to write warrants, get us to that next level. So we're excited about that. A newer topic is ghost cars and kind of the DMV trip permit. We do have a contact at DMV that we'll be meeting with. And then overall, I think the first phase that we're going to look at in the next kind of 2 to 3 months is hitting a bunch of roll calls. I'll be at Gresham later this afternoon, and making sure that the prosecution phase is kind of hemmed up and taken care of. So as you guys can see from the numbers, we are increasing our prosecution, but we really want to get to above 90% and as close to 100% as possible. That's going to really start with the prosecution end of it. So when we're thinking about the 3 phases of stolen vehicles, we have a vehicle right now, probably during this conference, will be stolen. The second phase is it's going to be active in the community, and then the third phase is going to be the prosecution once somebody is located in that stolen vehicle. So really phase 3 is what we're going to be focusing on this first couple of months. We'll have an office at MCSO Gresham. We'll be partnering with Port of Portland. We're talking about creating kind of a working group of all the local law enforcement agencies, including MCSO as well, to really be collaborative, share information, and make sure we're all on the same page of how do we kind of prove stolen vehicles. It is difficult, as Mike said. The law really does have this standard of knowledge. The statute's a little bit different. It's kind of a reckless mental state, but it's difficult to prove these cases. But with the work of Portland, specifically East Precinct, and I want to thank them with their SVOs and the data that we've seen and the enrichment factors that I think most of the press has been aware of and seen officers present on, good things will happen. So I think this first quarter, really tightening up our prosecution, hitting a lot of roll calls, talking with officers, how can we make things better? How do we get better cases? How do we get our prosecution rates up above 90%? And then we'll kind of circle back and hopefully, overall, I think the broad goal is community safety, but also reducing the number of stolen vehicles. And I think with the resources that we have and the partnership that we have with all area local law enforcement, we're going to be able to get there. Really, I think in the next several months, we can see a good decrease.
Might be good to, if you all had questions for Cody, so that I don't have to.
Yeah, so what are some of the things that you noticed that the district attorney's office needs to have up those cases and make them more successful to try?
Sure, I think a lot of that starts with just having kind of a uniform report writing, right? It's we see a lot of good reports, especially out of Portland, out of MCSO and Gresham, but just being on the same page of kind of being mechanical, and it's a process, right? When you do the stolen vehicle operations, you're starting with the enrichment factors, right? We're using data to stop the right vehicles. And so when you're out in the field and you see, the Hyundai with the taped up back window or the missing license plates, and you're kind of starting that process for initially collecting the data that leads to the stop and then processing the car, which then leads to the arrest and the interview. So just kind of having a better report writing process so we're not missing things and we're creating the right report. So if we do get to trial down the line, we can have a set of steps that let us know. And if we can get everybody to be uniform about that, then prosecution should be pretty fluid. So I think it's just tightening up that, but also we've talked about declines, right? And the numbers for thefts and the prosecution numbers for theft and UUVs have gone up. It's communicating with officers, right? When something is declined for follow-up with this task force now, we're going to have the resources to do that follow-up and say, I need the stolen report, or I need some follow-up on this, I'm missing this witness, I'm missing this piece of evidence, so then we can get that number up to above 90%. So I think it's really communication and having the resources to do the follow-up necessary to create cases that we can actually prosecute.
I think we've seen some success with the stolen vehicle operations here in East Precinct, but just wondering how the task force plans to implement those strategies citywide.
That's a good question. So here at East Precinct, we're going to be kind of starting a pilot program of having the ability to detach certain officers. So starting at East Precinct, we will have the ability to have more people in the field. I'll be able to go out. And like I said, we're creating we know persons of interest, right? And of course, they're innocent until proven guilty, but there are people that are known in this community that are proactively stealing cars, trafficking cars, or related to stolen cars. So I think we start here at East, we kind of build on how has prosecution worked, how has follow-up worked, and then we kind of spread that to Gresham, MCSO. Like I said, we'll be at all of the different precincts. We'll be at North, we'll be at Central, we'll be out in Troutdale, we'll be at Gresham, and kind of starting here, what is the success we've had on SVOs, how we had success prosecuting stolen vehicles as part of the stolen vehicle operation, and then spread that knowledge and spread that data to here's where we want to get to and here's how we successfully handle these types of cases.
And when will that go to in effect here? And depending on if you have success here in this area with the program, would that affect like future, like when you go to Gresham and other areas throughout the city?
Well, it's already gone into effect. So we have, this is a kind of my home base, right? East has done a lot of the SVOs. They have the data. They have the resources to really help us get things off the ground. And they already have just a great process in place. And they have great officers in place that have been doing a lot of stolen vehicle recoveries and have had success. But we've also had Gresham and MCSOs join our SVO mission. So it's already started. We've already kind of introduced the enrichment factors, this whole process and the data to other agencies. And as my schedule kind of develops and I can get out into the field more, I'll be able to hit more roll calls, have more face-to-face with officers and explain, this is the process, this is what we're looking at. If you have this information, I would like to know about it. If you know of a place, if you know of a person, if you know of a case that got declined for follow-up, let me know so we can fill in the gaps and we can piece it all together to get more prosecutions, get better outcomes, and then reduce vehicle thefts. And then ultimately, I think this has been talked about in the SVOs or kind of in some of the press before. We know that there's a lot of adjacent crimes to stolen vehicles, right? Whether that's UUVs, whether that's shootings. When I was out last night, you're getting calls all the time that this has happened or that has happened. And not to say that's always going to be related to a stolen vehicle, but there are a number of our major crimes or major call-outs that involve stolen vehicles. So if we can really start with the stolen vehicle, get those people or persons involved with stolen vehicles off the street, I think we're going to see a sharp decline in a lot of our major crimes, hopefully shootings, and then hopefully homicides.
You keep saying SVO, make sure you're defining.
Sure.
On the note of the complexity and difficulty of prosecuting cases, a lot of people aren't necessarily waiting for law enforcement to find their cars. Turning to social media, and these social media pages have like known chop houses that they are aware of and oftentimes refer people who are stealing their cars. I think some people might ask themselves, why is this Facebook page able to find this known chop house, but the district attorney's office or the police bureau isn't able to charge or prosecute these people?
Sure, and I'll back up, and Mike reminded me, so SVO stands for the Stolen Vehicle Operation. So that's when I'm talking generally about SVOs. So that's something we're actually looking into. I know there's several Facebook pages or groups in the community that are actively going out, really running their own missions to, like you said, find areas or find chop shops. And I have, I've looked at some of those posts and kind of seeing what they're seeing out there. We are hopefully going to be setting up a meeting soon with some of those stakeholders or some of those people that are involved with those groups and have some community outreach, right? It'll be, I kind of look at it as like a neighborhood watch. And how can we, with the understanding that you're not law enforcement and you're not the DA's office, but how can we work together so when you are seeing things out in the streets or when you're seeing problem areas, we can put some resources to address the chop shop or the known place where stolen cars are dumped, and then it will lead to prosecution. So I don't know if it's fair to say that they are able to recover things and we are not, because we're actively aware of the areas that they are, I guess, kind of policing and finding stolen vehicles. But you got to keep in mind, a lot of these recoveries are not occupied stolen vehicles. So it's great to have these people in the community, and I hope that we can form a partnership to identify places, identify stolen vehicles, but a lot of the resources that we have, and when, staffing issues at East, we can't always send an officer out to just go and recover cars. We have the PS3s, the public safety specialists that go out and are actively recovering, but we don't have, outside of the stolen vehicle operations, we're not actively, dedicating a person to go out and look for stolen vehicles. But now we'll have the resources where, like last night when I went out, we will be able to detach and go and look at things in the field in real time where we're not going to be dispatched to calls. So I'm hopeful that in the coming weeks, and my plan is probably in the next couple of days, I'm going to contact some of those administrators with some of the groups so we can set up kind of a working relationship of here's what we are doing on the police side, on the prosecution side, how can you help us and how can we help you to make the community a better place and get more cars recovered.
Cody, shifting to another thing you brought up, you mentioned ghost cars, and I was driving here and I actually saw a pickup truck with a DMV trip permit on it that blew through a traffic camera at 106, and I'm sure they'll be paying that ticket shortly. Maybe you could just tell us, I think we're all seeing this in the community, maybe you could tell us what can actually be done about people who are driving around with bogus trip permits.
With bogus trip permits, that's a good question. It depends on what the style of trip permit is, right? Because you have different types of permits. You have the booklets that go out to the dealership. It's kind of got the blue on it. And now you have the newer trip permits that look like your regular printed piece of paper that usually have 7 to 8 numbers. I had contact with the DMV recently. When you're out in the field and an officer runs something on their MDT, they get a lot of different hits for a vehicle plate, right, or a trip permit. So I think there's some problems with the DMV, or they're on a completely different reporting system. I don't want to say problems, but we're going to be working with them to say when an officer is in the field and they spot, depending on what the trip permit is, depending on what the plate is, how can we how can we find out the origins of that vehicle, right? How can we trace back that chain of custody? Because I think with the ghost car problem that we've seen in other parts of the country, it's very hard to trace certain vehicles, especially if they have the forged trip permit or if they're missing plates or if they've got switched plates. So I think it's starting with DMV kind of identifying when an officer runs this plate on their MDT, their mobile data terminal, and they get this hit of buyer information on file, but we don't see buyer information on file. How do we trace the steps back to see who actually sold this vehicle, who's supposed to own it, and why is it on the street right now? And then in terms of trip permits, we recently had a bigger case on one of the stolen vehicle operations where the vehicle was stopped because of one of these fake trip permits. And that case is still under investigation, but I think we're going to actively be working on, when we're going out, identifying the veracity of trip permits, where we can find those, and what are the origins of those? How are they getting onto vehicles? Are there people that are actively creating them? And how can we make sure that when a dealership or a third-party buyer or the DMV provides a trip permit, what is the record of that, and how can we trace that back so we're actually getting the correct trip permits on the correct car? What you're talking about with the truck that blew the red light, There are many people that, steal them out of vehicles, find them, so it's not hard to get a trip, take it off of a car. You could walk outside right now and take the plates off of somebody's car if you have a screwdriver. It's not that hard to do. So I think there's different angles for prosecution on, forgery charges or altering, an altered trip. There's different ways to attack that with prosecution, but I think big picture to start, it's working with the DMV to find out where the trip permit's coming from, how do we kind of stop the fake ones, and what can we do when we see those, and how do we approach those?
Has there been any community feedback to these efforts so far, and if so, what?
Sure. So I can't specifically speak to that. And when I deal with East Precinct or some of the SVO officers, they have had, in this very room, community meetings. And the feedback that I know of, and this, of course, is secondhand, has been all of the members, or a lot of members of East Precinct or in East Portland are in support of us being out here conducting these missions. And even when I've been out on missions, I have seen people come up and thanking us for being out there and proactively policing. So my sense is, and for what I know from talking with officers, we do have a great deal of community support, especially on the SVOs. And I have been in situations where people have approached us and thanked us for proactively policing and addressing the stolen car issue.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, I think, thank you, Cody. I'm going to turn it over to Teresa Turner now to talk about the Retail Theft Task Force.
Hi guys, thank you again for being here. My name is Teresa Turner. I've been with Multnomah County over 2 years. I started off on the row doing misdemeanors for a period of time, had a rotation at intake, and have been in the property and drug crime division with my colleague D.A. Linderholm for over a year. I've done a bunch of different kind of fraud cases. That's really my passion. I like a lot of fraud and embezzlement cases, and I'm excited to be a part of this theft task force. We've been working thus far with locating a lot of the retailers and which ones would be on the board, creating a board, and my goal is to have that board within the next 2 to 3 months. That'll be some of the big retailers as well as some of the local businesses in downtown Portland and various areas in Multnomah County. I've already started doing some of the organized retail task force missions. The responses thus far have been great, and I look forward to continuing to do missions like that and working with the East Precinct as well with North Precinct and Gresham, and working with the other precincts that may not have the funding, but applying for some funding through CJC in order so that they are able to have dedicated funding for the precincts that don't, to do some of the organized retail task force missions. And I'm just would prefer questions. I like questions better than talking about myself.
One of the issues has been the follow-up, has been accessing surveillance video or reports from loss prevention officers. In speaking with business owners, one suggestion they've made, and I'm curious if you've heard the same thing, is they're looking for some type of portal or easy way to upload that video and provide the necessary reports, almost a one-stop shop, which doesn't exist now. Have you heard that criticism or suggestion, and how may you resolve that?
Absolutely, I've heard that, and that's one of the things that I've been doing thus far since we started this just 11 days ago, is meeting with them and talking about that. One of the struggles that they've had is the portal that they upload stuff. If there's somebody that is identified, they have to wait until officers come, so then they're not able to upload reports. And so we're actually working with the retailers right now to try and get that fixed in the system. That way we're able to get those reports a lot faster. I'm also going to be working on training some of the LPOs about reports and what a completed report is. That way we will have it when the officers kind of go back and are getting reports uploaded, kind of like what a complete package would need, because that was one of the issues that we're having before, where we weren't able to find out exactly which LPOs were there that day, or follow up and find the videos, or getting a receipt with the entire amount. And so I believe that a lot of that training that we'll be doing, as well as my dedicated officer going there with the LPOs and talking to them about kind of what a completed report looks like, will help with some of that. And I believe it already is. If you look at the numbers, I think it was about 20% of the thefts being prosecuted are going up. And I believe part of that, after going out on a mission, is that collaboration between the LPOs and the officers, and actually being able to hear real time what's going on, and being there right then and there when a suspect's walking out the door with the items, and being able to collect those items real time. Oh, loss prevention officer, my apologies.
On that note, the big corporations, the targets, they have those loss prevention teams to kind of know what you guys are looking for. What is the extra work, or what does it look like with small businesses who don't necessarily have those resources? How are you able to help kind of connect and fill out that resource?
And that goes to the board that I am creating. I don't only just want the large retailers, but some of the local ones. The local retailers have also been hit pretty hard during the COVID period. And it's getting together and doing those trainings, because even with the large retailers, there's trainings and there's follow-up that's not happened. That's across the board between large and small retailers. And so I believe creating that board and that platform, and going actually to the stores, going on to the missions, and having that connect there, and going through that training, and whether it's a checklist or whether it's, hey, can you kind of explain what's going on, and being able to do that follow-up, and just that interconnectedness that is in the process of, being created right now, I believe will fix that, and they'll be able to see kind of and understand why, like D.A. Linderholm was saying with the declines, why the cases are being declines. Is it because there's no video? Is it because we're missing some reports? But being able to get us all in a room and be able to meet, whether it's every month or every other month, to discuss those and see kind of like what's going on in their top complaints, we'll be able to solve that. Small and large retailers.
What's the ratio of those being arrested for resale theft and those being prosecuted?
I believe that that's in the report that you guys have been provided, and in that, that's for misdemeanors and felonies.
I actually don't have it.
Oh, would you like one? Okay.
I'll get it after.
Okay.
Seeing as it's 81%, for these retail theft missions, do you have any idea if the prosecution from those missions, is it higher than 81%, or do you have any inclination if those have been more successful in prosecution?
So I can only speak on the missions that have been created, recently, and the ones that we've kind of been doing recently. I can't really speak to the ones that I have not been a part of, I would say. Doing more of these missions and increasing these missions, I believe, will definitely lead to more prosecution in those cases.
A lot of these cases, it seems, are driven by drug addiction. And I just wonder, kind of your philosophy in looking at this, is the goal ultimately to arrest and detain these people, or to rehabilitate them? And if it's rehabilitate, how does that play into this?
So I would say our goal is to have people feel comfortable shopping in their local stores. That's what the goal is. And if someone is a part of doing, and we're talking about the prolific ones, the ones that are going in and it's tens and thousands of dollars. If during that time and during the process, it becomes apparent that treatment is something that this person would benefit from, that's something that would play out later on with negotiations and a possible trial and then sentencing. That would play out there. And so that is taken into consideration post-mission, post-theft. Yes, it is.
Teresa, I think maybe to go back to what was being raised by the camera operator, Mr. Camera Operator. I'm seeing theft offenses, and I'm seeing theft issuance rate, but I think the missing piece is referrals, right? Like how many of these cases are being reported? I think the DA mentioned maybe it's down 5%. Of course, this year's not over yet, so the numbers aren't complete. And then you can see the issuance rate is going up, but if you're making less referrals, then it doesn't matter if the issuance rate is going up. So can you, if it is going down or it is going up, so can you talk about how referrals are happening right now?
And just so that I'm clear on your question, you're asking, are the referrals for thefts going down?
Or up, or staying the same?
I would say the theft referrals to our office aren't going down. If anything, they would be going up due to collaboration and due to have the completed reports, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we can pull that data.
Yeah.
And send it to you.
I know you don't have the numbers right in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What else needs to be done to slow retail theft?
That's a very good question. I would say what else needs to be done to slow retail theft is some of it is a little bit outside of kind of what's going on during that moment and during that transaction, so to say. It's some of the things that are going on in the community, some of the houselessness, some of the homelessness, some of the addiction in which you were referring to earlier. I think those kind of things being addressed, and mental health, and all those things that are leading to people that are stealing from the different retailers. With more of those things being addressed, and with people having access to those resources, knowing about those resources, I believe that would help in the slow of it. As well as, we're also dealing with a defense attorney crisis at this time. And so with that in mind, and with some people, being released soon after being arrested, all those things kind of come into play outside of just the prosecution side. And so it's really, the answer is really many things being addressed at once, right? If I had the golden egg and could make everyone stop, all the thefts go away, that would happen. But I think it's really a community, and it's a community response, not just straight from just prosecution alone.
Right. Great. Okay.
Other unrelated questions we need to?
Yeah, when it's back to me. All right. Just to wrap up on some of the things that Teresa just said. Of note is we had some law changes that just passed in the legislature. We're really looking forward to strengthen our hands in terms of prosecution. I don't have the bill numbers off the top of my head, but we can get you those. But there were two pieces of legislation that specifically impact retail theft. And one is addressing the crime of organized retail theft, which will now enable law enforcement and prosecutors to aggregate cases across different jurisdictions. So we all know that theft knows no county bounds, right? So when thefts happen in Multnomah County, Clackamas County, Washington County, and people are hitting all the same stores, we can now aggregate those, and any one of us district attorneys' offices can prosecute those cases as one case to show the organized nature of the retail theft. The other part is looking at the timeline that we can add up the number of thefts. So one individual theft might be for $100, right? That's a misdemeanor. You steal $100 worth of goods. But if you do that 10 times, now you're into felony land, right? Or just getting over that $1,000 threshold. So the legislature has lengthened the amount of time that we can take to add up a bunch of different incidences, to aggregate it, and to really reflect what is happening with this incident, which is not just one isolated incident, but a pattern and practice of an individual who is engaged in organized retail theft. So those two things are really going to strengthen our hands as law enforcement. The other thing, which Teresa already kind of mentioned, was the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission was granted $5 million to spend across the state of Oregon for law enforcement activities related to organized retail theft. So we're expecting that they are going to roll out an application process for law enforcement agencies to be able to access those funds to hopefully enhance our ability to do enforcement actions in the community. So two really good bright spots in addition to our local efforts to build a task force that is going to be really private-public partnership focused. So with that.
If we can shift gears just a little bit, I was hoping that you could comment on the dismissal of misdemeanor charges against Officer Corey Budworth. How did we get to this point? What was the process in getting there?
Yeah, first and foremost, I want to commend Terry Jacobs, the victim in that case, and Officer Corey Budworth. Restorative justice is not an easier process. They have been engaged in conversations now, working with restorative justice professional practitioners for a longer period of time. I don't know exactly how many months, but they've been meeting together individually and then together for months and having dialogue about what it would take to heal for the victim, in this case, Terry Jacobs. And I really want to commend, those are hard conversations to have. And I saw and I watched Officer Budworth's very heartfelt apology in his words, and they were clearly very meaningful to Terry Jacobs. For me, this case is really kind of emblematic of something that I think has needed to be addressed for a long time in our community. I know that our community has still not healed from 2020. I talk to police officers on a regular basis where they still talk to me about the trauma of that period of time. I talk to community members who still talk to me about the trauma of that time. I think the fact that Terry and Corey Budworth could get together and have those conversations and that dialogue is hopefully symbolic and what we need as a community to heal, to move forward. And they were the ones who individually took the brave steps to do that hard work. And, you know, I remember when I was a little kid, the worst thing, you know, your parents can punish you for, you know, beating up on your sibling. I have a younger sister. They say, go to your room, and you'd be all mad at your parents about that. And you say, oh, my parents are unfair and this or that. The worst thing my parents could ever do to me was make me sit down with my sister, give her a hug, and apologize. That's hard. It's hard to actually look someone in the eye, understand that you caused harm, and take accountability for that. And so I really commend Officer Budworth and Terry for being able to do that. And I hope this can turn as like an inflection point for our community to say, you know, if they can do it, all of us can do it. I think we can heal as a community from that.
Whose idea was the public apology on video, and how critical was that in resolving the case?
So I'll talk about my role in this, which was to make this process available to the victim and to the officer if they wanted to participate in this. We were ready to go to trial. We certainly would have been able to do that. I think in the end that wouldn't have been the best result for our community, because then both sides one side would win, one side would lose, and we'd walk away from that with hard feelings. My office, we help facilitate them getting together. Now, what actually happened in that facilitation, we were not a party to. So the district attorney's office was not in the conversations. We left it up to them and the restorative justice practitioners to guide the process into what they agreed upon as would be necessary for the victim to feel like she was heard and that she got what she needed. So it was all negotiated through restorative justice and what they came to as what they required.
And so ultimately that decision to dismiss the case, they'll come to you.
Correct.
What led to that decision?
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. So my agreement when we saw this as an opportunity, and we saw this as an opportunity in this specific case and for the greater community, was to make this process available. My commitment to both parties were that if the restorative justice practitioners who were hired to do this work with the parties, if they came back to me as the district attorney and said, the police officer and the victim, everybody participated in good faith, and that the process has concluded with the resolution, then that would be the triggering event for me to dismiss the case. If either party would not have participated in good faith or it would have broken down, we would have ended up prosecuting the case in the normal way that we usually would. It would likely resolve in trial. So the triggering event was not a specific video or something for me. It was the restorative justice practitioners relaying to me both sides participated in good faith and they are both satisfied with the resolution.
If you could describe the restorative justice process.
Yeah, thank you. So restorative justice is, it's not a new thing. In fact, it predates our criminal justice system as a practice. The idea of restorative justice is first and foremost asking the harmed party what they need to heal. And so you start off with them and say, hey, how can we help you move forward? In our specific situation, we worked with a restorative justice practitioner in our community who does this kind of work. We engaged them to work with these two folks. And then they met for a period of months having the conversations. And they don't just start putting two people in a room together and say, all right, hash it out. It really is work individually with each person and get them to talk about the situation. And when the restorative justice practitioners believe that both sides are ready to have dialogue, then they engage them and they facilitate that dialogue to happen where they can actually have meaningful conversations and hear from each other directly and then come to an agreement about how the harm can be healed.
Well, some of the reaction that I've seen from this story is that this is a process not available to everybody. I think you spoke to it being somewhat dependent on the willingness of the victim or the harmed party, but how prevalent do you see this being as a tool in the toolbox?
Yeah, you're right. This is not a process available to everybody at this point. But first step is a victim even interested in this? Because if the victim says, hey, I don't want anything to do with restorative justice, I want my day in court, that's what we're going to do. We have now, through a grant from the state, we have a restorative justice program. I think we have had about a dozen cases over the last year where victims have said, yeah, I'd rather do a restorative process. They're all at various stages of completion. So we haven't had a lot of cases go through the process yet, but it is available to more than just this specific case. More educated on, understanding what it means. Victim satisfaction is much higher than when they go through. And we see that the recidivism rates for the offender or the party that harmed the victim is way lower than our recidivism rates for going through the criminal justice. 50% of the people will recidivate after being convicted and getting some sort of a punishment. So we know that it works. We know that it's better for the community, but people aren't really used to it yet. So I'm also hopeful that this case can help lift up the issue and educate people and get people more curious about what it means.
Did you have any comment on the county's decision to suspend the health department's harm reduction program regards to fentanyl? I think they did that yesterday. Do you have any comment on that?
I don't have a comment on that. You know, you all know probably from things that I've said in the past that I believe that addiction is a health issue. So I'm going to leave that to the health experts to guide that process and advise the county on what makes sense.
Are there any other cases going through the restorative justice process currently?
There are. I believe, like I said, we've had about a dozen cases that have entered it at some point, and they're at various stages. I'm not sure that any others have made it to the resolution phase yet. I think this might be the first one we've actually gotten to completion. But there are a number of cases that are in process.
Do you have an estimate of that number?
I think it's about a dozen, but we can follow up.
Are those specialists county employees?
They are not. The specialists are, we worked with the Insight Alliance, I believe is the name of the group that we worked with, that we contracted with to provide those services. So it's a community-based organization.
Some people might say that this charging decision was, risky. It certainly led to the resigning of all of the members of Officer Butler's team that was responding to protests. I noticed there are no officers seated beside you today for this press conference. I mean, do you ever worry that we talked a lot about collaboration today. Do you ever worry that, that led to disharmony between the DA's office and the police bureau?
Well, I think what my job is as the district attorney is to apply the facts of a case to the law. And that's what we did in this situation. We believed that a crime was committed, and so we charged the officer. That's what we're tasked with doing as prosecutors. That can make things challenging when every single day you work with law enforcement and then in a situation you are now charging an officer with a crime. I am very happy that it resolved this way. I think had it not resolved this way, we would have had a trial. And what would have happened at trial is either the officer would have been convicted or the officer would have been acquitted. And either way, you would have had people in this community, it would have reopened a lot of wounds. If the officer was convicted, I think that probably would have reopened a lot of wounds for police officers. I think if the officer was acquitted, that probably would have opened some wounds for community members who felt like the officer maybe wouldn't have been held accountable. Through restorative justice, we were able to come up with a process where I think hopefully everybody has the shared goal that we're together, that we had two different opposing sides sit down, talk it out, and find a path forward to healing. So I hope that this case, even though it's between two individuals, hopefully can heal some of the wounds between the greater law enforcement and community side of this issue.
I realize the camping ban has only been in effect for a few days, but first, have any cases been referred to your office?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And then secondarily, have any questions come up that have been presented to you surrounding the camping ban in recent days since it's been in effect?
We have had conversations, not me personally, but members of my team I know have met with city officials, and within that have been Portland police officers and other law enforcement, just kind of talking about the nuts and bolts about, okay, what does this look like? What do we need for a case? And I think we, talked a little bit about that last time about how, the way that the policy and the ordinance is set up, we're going to have multiple contacts, which likely means multiple police officers would be witnesses. And then we're going to also, as prosecutors, need to be able to show that there were resources available, that the person was referred to, and that they actually existed. So we've had some conversations about what does that actually look like to put a case like this together, and just trying to work through some of those details and recognizing there'll be some challenges along the way.
Have there been any progress in creating a diversion program or community court or that kind of thing?
We're looking at a community court. Community court is a resource that we had in this community, but we lost during the pandemic. When the courts were really slowed down and people were trying not to come into congregate settings, the court shut down our community court. It has not been brought back yet. That is something that we're actively, looking at to see what that would look like. We have the Behavioral Resource Center, which is a new resource, so we've been in conversations with them to see if there's some sort of collaboration we could do with them. So we're having in the kind of the earlier stages about what it would look like to bring back a community court, but we're not quite there yet.
On the note of legislature, we could just sneak one more in. Fentanyl possession also being criminalized. Do you have a plan for your prosecutors on how to handle those?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I don't have the bill number in front of me, but I supported that legislation. In fact, one of our deputy attorneys, Leslie Wu, was the technical expert that testified in front of the legislature on how to accomplish that and to change the statutes. So we were supportive of the legislature doing that. So what we're looking at for us is, again, talking with law enforcement. One of the challenges of fentanyl, the way that it was previously written, is that we were supposed to look at the weight of the fentanyl specifically, but you all are probably well aware that fentanyl is not like that. It's in part of a pill that has other ingredients and things in it. So how do you weigh the fentanyl specifically? So the legislation, what it does is it makes it so that we can now talk about how many pills a person possesses that is a user amount. And I believe the statute puts it in that 1 to 5 range of pills now. So what we really did is we changed the fentanyl statute to make it so that we can enforce that law. You get a stage anymore, now you're back to the criminal possession of an amount of fentanyl. So I was very proud of the work our office did, and Cody's actually done a lot of work on fentanyl prosecution and done some really innovative things in that field. So we'll continue to work that.
I was just going to add to your question, we have 5 or 6 cases right now that are being vetted for the restorative justice program. That doesn't include all the ones that have already been entered into the program, but right now we're looking at 5 or 6 to get in, and I can confirm all the other numbers later.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Awesome. Well,
All right, as you can see there, wrapping up the task force press conference basically that we just had going on there with the DA, talking about the auto task force and the organized retail task force. Looks like the video's cutting out, but they just got finished with the Q&A there at the end. So to recap some of what just happened, so this was the, again, Mike Schmidt talking about this, talking about the two task forces that they set up on May 1st, talking about where they've been so far, what's happened so far, and then also getting updates from the two deputy DAs who are in charge of each one of these task forces. You have Deputy DA Cody Linderholm, who's in charge of the auto theft task force, trying to cut down on that. Some of the things that he mentioned, there's 3 phases of stolen vehicles. A vehicle stolen, then it's active in the community, and then the prosecution side. He said they're going to be focusing a lot on the prosecution side to bring those prosecutions up for the car thefts that have been happening. At the top, they did say that 82% of stolen vehicles are recovered within 30 days, and that auto theft is down 5%, but 5% not being good enough for where they wanted it to be. He also said that they're going to be working on a better reporting process. So when a car is stolen, the process of how it's written up, how you notice details, how the officers go about that. Apparently, they're going to be revamping that to some extent. We'll get some more details on that, but again, just giving you some of the quick headlines from this. And also working on stopping fake trip permits, which has been a big issue that they've also been working on. From there, we heard from Deputy DA Teresa Turner, who is working on the organized retail theft task force to bring down some of that. A couple of key highlights that were mentioned during there, working also to get theft reports faster. So that reporting process, speeding that up, making that a smoother process between a loss prevention officer and, say, the actual reporting officer as far as the theft happens. They're working on some ways to update that. They also, actually, Teresa Turner also said that addressing some of the other issues that are going on in the city as far as homelessness, drug use, things that could lead to retail theft. She said that will hopefully have some kind of an effect on that. And that's where they're going with there. Also, the issue of dealing with a defense attorney crisis, which is going on in the city of Portland and Multnomah County right now, in that there's not enough DAs. We've got a lot of reports on that, but it ends up leading to sometimes people who are arrested for something going right back out onto the street. So it sounds like a very multi-pronged approach to this, and that was the update so far. We've got Connor McCarthy, who's been out there reporting on this. He was there at that event, and he'll have a lot of updates, I'm sure, going forward here for our later on news broadcasts and also online as well to fill you in on all the details. It was an hour-long press conference, so there's a lot of information that was given out there. A lot of questions were asked. They did answer quite a few of them, but those were just some of the key points that we saw from this press conference. So we'll have more details for you at kptv.com. And like I said, going up to the 4 p.m. News broadcast, we'll have more things happening there as far as what was addressed, what wasn't addressed, and where we're at with those task forces. So I thank everybody for tuning into this part. This is Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler. I'm the host here of our digital news desk here in the KPTV, the Fox 12 Oregon newsroom. And we do broadcast live every day at 1 p.m. Pacific, and sometimes we have scheduled programming, and some of that just got bumped right now for this breaking news. So if there's ever breaking news or press conferences or news conferences like this, we'll have those right here in the afternoons for you. I will be right back. We've got some other scheduled programming that we're going to be coming right back with. It's live, and I'll have actually Jason Fellman, who's going to be on talking about the Hair Fest. So we've got a lot of different things we cover. I'm going to have Nick Krupke, of course, our sports anchor, who's live up in Seattle at the Major League Baseball All-Star Game, and we're going to be talking about it's Amazon Prime Day, and there are scams out there where people are trying to scam you. All this is coming up here within the next hour, so I'm going to sign off right now, but wherever you're watching, just hop back right on here in just a few minutes, and I'll be back live bringing you all of that other coverage. So thanks for tuning in. We'll sign off for right now. Just stick around. We'll be right back with more Fox 12 Now.